Look at John chapter 20, verse number 30. Truly, Jesus did many other signs. And if you're looking at your hard copy, you'll notice these words are written in black, not red. What does that mean? Well, that's just John talking. This is not Jesus talking. This is the author talking to his audience. John 20, 30. Truly, Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So John does what Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not do. Matthew, Mark, and Luke do not have a descriptive verse inside of their gospel that says, here's why I'm writing this. But John does. John, telling you things no one else tells you, says to you, the reason that I have given you these stories is so that you might believe on him, and so that in believing in him, you might have life in his name. And so John's description of the miraculous Jesus and the teaching Jesus and the communion Jesus, and those are all things we get inside of the book of John, are so that the reader will read about a man named Jesus who by the time John writes this has been gone for decades. Died, resurrected, ascended. He's disappeared off the earth scene. John's dealing in a church environment in which people are starting to teach a Gnosticism doctrine comes along that says Jesus was never really here. He wasn't actually a man in the flesh. This is all a product of some psychotic delusion, some spiritual experience that these people had. And that message is actually gaining traction in John's day. So he writes his gospel to say, no, I saw him, I was with him. He even opens his epistle, 1 John 1, by saying, I saw him, I touched him, he's real. Right. And so when he writes his gospel, he says, I wrote it so that you would believe and have life in his name. And I think that's a crucial statement, because the opposite of that would be not believing and then having no life in his name. So if we want to talk about the nature of belief, I can't do it from a psychological standpoint. I'm not trained in that field, or maybe I'm not that smart. I don't know the psychology of belief. I know the theology of belief, and our theology of belief is left in a word called faith. And left in a word called faith is believing in what we don't see, not out of delusional hope, but believing in what we don't see because we have a firm foundation, and I believe a relational foundation, of having had an experience in meeting the man Christ Jesus. And yet none of us in here have met him physically, or probably very few of us have met him in the physical, in the natural, and yet our belief system is that the stories about him are true. We don't believe because we saw him do stuff. None of us saw him do stuff. We weren't there. We believe, we hear of what he did, but it either resonates with us or it doesn't resonate with us. And out of that comes faith, or out of that comes unbelief. So some people can read the stories of Jesus and hear about Jesus, and it doesn't resonate with their heart, and they walk away and go, just a dead guy in a book. We hear the stories of Jesus, we believe what the Word says about him, we believe the witnesses of him and those who wrote about him, and we go looking after him for relationship, and we walk away with that foundational thing called belief. And that's what John is going for, and when we do that, look at that last phrase again, that believing you may have life in his name, and I want to hit that contrast one more time before we leave here, before we leave this passage. If by believing you have life in his name, then by not believing you would not have life. And that doesn't mean you're not physically alive, because everyone in this room is physically alive, and everyone you know on the earth is physically alive, and yet by not believing in his name, we never walk in the life he provides. And this is a good foundational place to start in an understanding of two different covenants this morning. Under the old covenant, the relationship that God had with Israel is, I am the God that healeth thee. That's how God described himself to Israel. You're going to walk through a wilderness, but your shoes won't wear out. That's almost silly, right? We read that and go that. And I don't know if God literally didn't make their shoes wear out, or if God's metaphorically saying, don't ever worry about stuff. I'll always put clothes on your back, and I'll always pay your bills, and I'll always heal your kids, and I'll always make sure you make it to the other side of Red Seas, and I'll keep Egypt off your backside, and I'll bring water out of rocks, and I'll drop manna out of heaven, and I will provide for you in every possible way. I'm the God that heals you. I'm the God who is your provision. That's an old covenant promise to the nation of Israel. He didn't promise it to the Philistines. He didn't promise it to the Greeks. He didn't make that promise to the Romans. He made that promise to Israel. And man, they held on to that. And then came Jesus. And almost right out of the gate, John introduces a talking Jesus, an action Jesus, a little bit of both, but he introduces him to a good staunched Israelite named Nicodemus. And Jesus says to Nicodemus, unless a man is born again, he doesn't see the kingdom that I'm talking about. You can see a kingdom, just look around, there's a Roman Empire. But if a man's not born again inside, something's got to happen inside, he's never really going to see the kingdom that I want to bring, because the kingdom that I bring starts in the invisible realm. It becomes visible through your actions and through your love and through your compassion and through your day-to-day walk, but it starts in the invisible realm, and that's the kingdom I want to accelerate you into. And what's that famous John 3:16? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him shall not perish. They shall have life. What kind of life? Everlasting life. They shall not perish, but have everlasting life. So what's the promise of the new covenant? Promise of the new covenant, whosoever, not just Israel, but yes, Philistines, yes, Greeks, yes, Romans, and though we don't know you exist yet, yes, Americans. Okay, looking forward. Whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. The new covenant promises not, I'm the God that healeth thee, and doesn't let your shoes rot, and always makes you cross Red Seas. The new covenant is, I'm the God who provides you with the wisdom of the everlasting and gives you life in the midst of a world full of death.